Welcome to another interesting edition of the APF Podcast series. Today, we're having a conversation with a long-standing member of the APF community, Tim Hanstand, who is the Vice Chair of Chandler Foundation. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you so much.
I have to say, this is Tim's second time around. It shows you how popular he is and how we love having conversations with him at the APF. Tim, can you tell us about the work of Chandler Foundation and why it's important for the foundation to be part of a network like African Philanthropy Forum?
Sure. Well, let me start with the second part of your question, why it's important for us to be part of APF. I think it's important for us because we learn so much from others. We go into this business of philanthropy with a beginner's mindset. Others have been at it longer. So we have the opportunity to learn. Also because we're not from the continent, and learning from others on the continent about context is so important. And so I just want to thank you for the great work that APF does. And yeah, we're very proud to be part of it. In terms of the first part of your question, what does the Chandler Foundation do? Our primary focus is on the issue of governance. And that's based on the recognition that governments are the most important lever for determining the social and economic outcomes of people. I spent most of my career on the CSO, the implementing side, as a social entrepreneur, as an NGO leader. And throughout that 3+ decades of doing that, I was always surprised that there weren't more NGOs that were actively engaging with government to help improve those public systems. So when I moved out of that role and was approached by my now principal, Richard Chandler, I was very impressed that he had the same basic observation. And his observation was from the philanthropic side that most philanthropy is aiming at alleviating symptoms of failed government systems.
Yeah.
And trying to fill in the gaps where government was failing. And his question was, why can't more philanthropy actually move upstream and try to play a role in building up those government systems? Because we know where government systems are working quite well, there's much less need for philanthropy. So I was very impressed with that observation, have been pleased to be able to work with Richard Chandler and the Chandler Foundation now for the past 6 years.
Fantastic. And it's really great that you mentioned working with government, efficiency in government, and focusing on systems as opposed to solving the symptoms. And we're at the Prime Governance Weekend, which is really focused on getting government engagement to develop Africa and change the way we do things on the continent. And you're having a session that is really focused on the specific issue, government efficiency, why it's important to have improved performance at government level. Can you speak a bit more? Give us a sneak preview into the conversation you're going to have at your session during this weekend.
Sure. Well, first let me say that the Chandler Foundation has two sister organizations. One is the Singapore-based Chandler Institute of Governance, and that's who's running this session tomorrow. And then we also have an organization called the Chandler Institute of Justice, which was just formed last year, based in Cape Town. Now, both organizations aim to engage with government to help improve public systems. CIG, the Singapore-based organization, helps with governments to improve their systems, to build capacities and capabilities of the civil service and beyond. The Chandler Institute of Justice engages with government to help support government-led law reform efforts on the continent. So that was a long wind-up and didn't get right to your question, but the session tomorrow is about high-performance governments. How do we help governments perform better? And I'm not sure what the other speakers, there's three other much more qualified speakers than me at that session, but I'll be speaking about what is the role of philanthropy and of civil society in helping governments become more high performing.
Okay, that's really great to hear. And it's interesting when you say there are others that are better qualified. But speaking of your qualifications, you just co authored an article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and you asserted that working with governments is one of the best ways to scale philanthropic impact. And so there's a lot of knowledge you have in this space, and we're curious to know, when foundations seek to scale impact through government partnerships, what do you believe is most often misunderstood about government systems and capacities, especially given the African context? Because I know you work significantly in Africa, specifically, I believe in Zambia and Malawi. Please speak to your experiences and what you think, we need to know in going into these relationships with government.
First, I just want to briefly make the case for why engage with governments. I said earlier that they're the most important lever for determining the outcomes of people. It's only governments that have the rule-making ability to change policy, which is a very leveraged way of creating impact. But beyond just the policy making, it's governments have amount of financial resources that dwarfs what philanthropy has.
Absolutely.
So if you look at the amount of money that governments have, just on that alone, the leverage that philanthropy could have by, rather than just trying to fill in the gaps of where government is doing, is trying to impact the efficiency with which government resources are used. And then finally, only governments typically have the delivery mechanisms that have the potential, at least, to reach across the country, much more so than NGOs do. And frankly, governments have the mandate. We talk about accountability to people. At least if there is some type of democratic institutions present, governments have much more accountability to people than do NGOs. And by the way, a bit of a side note here, the whole issue of the localization or decolonization of aid and philanthropy, which I think is such an important discussion and movement, but what often doesn't get included in it is that governments are proximate actors as well. It's not just community-based organizations, governments are as well. So that's kind of the case to why engage in government. Your question is about the challenges of doing that, and there are many challenges. I think, and some of them are articulated in the article. Why isn't philanthropy doing more of it? Why aren't NGOs doing more of it? I think NGOs often point to the fact that they have a difficult time getting funding from philanthropy in order to do it. And I think some of that is true. There are mindsets and muscles, I think, of both philanthropists and NGOs that make it difficult to engage constructively with governments. One is that NGOs often see their role as holding government accountable. So this watchdog role, which very much needs to be played, and I think NGOs need to do that. It's very difficult for a single NGO to both be doing that and then to constructively engage with government. to some extent, I think choosing an outside advocacy, inside advocacy approach, I think is important for NGOs. But we have this mindset often that government is the enemy and that government is incompetent or not capable or not a good partner. So there are many reasons why we choose often to go around government rather than through them. Our experience has been actually quite positive, I think, in both Malawi and Zambia. And in part, and I'm not saying we're doing everything right. We are learning as we go and we are making mistakes for sure. But we started with the approach of trying to understand what government's priorities are and identifying where those priorities intersect with our priorities.
Absolutely.
And then asking government, how do you think we can best support where those priorities overlap? Now, that's quite a different approach than just trying to identify the civil society landscape and figuring out who are the best groups and then going. So we take what is a government first approach and try to establish a trust-filled relationship with the government and to support them from behind, not to push our agenda. I mean, it's not that we don't have an agenda, but we only look for areas where that agenda overlaps with the government's, and we're very clear about that. And then it's about establishing that trust-filled relationship. And when I say government, ultimately it's about people. It's also about trying to identify who are the key reformers, who are decision makers and actors within the areas where our priorities overlap. And creating human relationships, trust-filled relationships with them, and then trying to leverage those relationships with government to make connections with civil society, which I think we've been able to do in both Malawi and Zambia.
Awesome. I think that's a great way of approaching that, finding the sweet spot and coming in through that. You've started speaking to my next question, which is really wanting to understand better what the mechanisms are, the effective mechanisms for making for a good partnership on both sides. And you made two important points that I just want to reiterate. One is the fact that government is also proximate. When we talk about proximate organizations, we're not thinking of government, we're only thinking of the non-profit organizations. And the second is humanizing government and not just seeing government as this distant, inefficient, unfriendly, and not interested in our own interests. So understanding that we both want the same thing. We may be going about them differently, but finding that alignment and coming in through that. So I just want you to share, if you have some success stories based on your experience in Malawi, in Zambia, working with government. Is there anything you can point to as some interesting experience or story that you can share with us that exemplifies what you just shared, and possibly even failures, ways not to go about this?
Yeah. We often learn more from our failures than from our successes. In both Malawi and Zambia, we have used the framework of the open government partnership to advance our priorities. So let me go back and say a little bit about what our priorities are in trying to support the government. We, again, believe that high-performing governments are key. We think that good governance is key. And as we have looked at what is the most common predictor of good governance, it is a low level of corruption. That is very high on the list. So we have used that as our entry point. And we tend to prefer not to talk about anti-corruption, but rather about building cultures and systems of integrity within government. It's not an anti. It's proactive, but it's also not just about reacting to corruption, but trying to build systems that help prevent corruption. So as we looked first in Malawi, where we started, and later in Zambia, we have used the framework of the Open Government Partnership. And just to briefly explain what that is, the Open Government Partnership is now a community of 77 nations across the world where government and civil society have come together to agree on an action plan for creating more accountable and transparent government. And governments have to meet certain eligibility criteria to become a member, but then they have to actively become a member if, and I believe there's something like 16 countries on the continent who are now members. Now, why have we found this as a great framework? It's because it brings government and civil society together in a framework that has them co-creating an action plan and co-creating implementation of that action plan. And they also have an independent review mechanism that actually comes in to determine whether they're making progress on that plan. So I think these multi-stakeholder frameworks are a great opportunity for philanthropists to support. I mean, you can support the Secretariat of OGP for one, but you can actually ask in a country that already is an OGP member, there will be an action plan where civil society's bought in and government's bought in. So why wouldn't you want to support those activities? And it's all about making government more accountable, transparent, and effective in public service delivery. And so OGP is just one of those frameworks. There's multi-stakeholder frameworks around the natural resource sector called EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. There's the cost framework around infrastructure. So I think these are great opportunities for philanthropists and for NGOs to engage.
This is a perfect segue into my next question, because you already started talking about government and civil society belonging to the same network, where there are specific action points or specific objectives that they're aligned on, and it's easier to get things done that way. And we also recognize that there are shifts in political systems. We're living in a very, very different world at the moment, and things change. By the time we're done with this interview, something might have happened, right? How do you think governments can best, or I would rather say, how do you think funders can navigate this fast changing environment that we're in, given that they are working with proximate organizations, civil society organizations that might be caught in crosshairs, and their programs may be derailed because of the funding cuts that we're currently experiencing? Now, how do you think we can come together as philanthropists and as government to navigate the current political landscape and solve the issue? And also, more importantly, how do we not find ourselves in this space in another 2-3 years?
Yeah. Well, I'll make one observation that's related to your question, and that is that the cuts in foreign aid in ODA are of such a magnitude that philanthropy is not big enough to fill in that gap.
Yeah.
It's unrealistic to think that the amount of resources will be filled by philanthropy. So what does that mean? That means that NGOs and governments who have become accustomed to operating based on that aid are going to have to find new ways of achieving impact. And I think the best way of doing that is to focus or refocus on improving government performance. There's many studies showing that investments to improve the capacity and capabilities of government have a 10x, sometimes more, return than additional funding to governments as status quo. So it is important to be thinking about how is the financing gap, that is the focus of this IGW, is the financing gap.
Yeah.
But I think even more important is how do we make governments more effective and efficient? The analogy is used in elsewhere, and I'm borrowing this, of thinking about governments as a car. And many of our governments are old, not very well functioning car. Think of a car from the 1950s or something that's, barely puttering along. And of course it needs fuel. And we have to keep putting more fuel into it. But the issue of are we worried about how much fuel we're using, or can we focus on improving
The
the car,
efficiency of
the
the car.
efficiency of the car? And I just think that's the order of the day. And there's many NGOs out there that are already doing great work at engaging with governments to help build systems. Some of them working in specific sectors, in education, in health, in livelihoods, on land issues, on digital public infrastructure. And then there are other NGOs that are working more across government about building the capacity of civil service, not in a specific sector. Chandler Institute for Governance is one of those. But I think we as philanthropists need to be thinking about how can we put at least some of our resources and more of our resources into improving the capacity of government. And it's not that the direct service delivery dealing with the symptoms has to go away. I think some of that is still going to be needed. I just observed that probably 95% of philanthropy is now doing that, is based on alleviating symptoms, and 5% or less is about improving the systems. Why don't we
flip that?
Flipping it would be, I think, great if we could even get to 20% or 30%. So if a philanthropist is interested in a particular area, health, look for NGOs that are working that are directly engaging with the government to improve the public health system. On education, the same. I would make an argument for addressing the corruption issue or the integrity issue going across government. It's been estimated that more money is lost to corruption. The amount of money lost to corruption is 10x what ODA is. So why aren't we spending more effort to try to do that? And just to give one example of how that can be done, government procurement systems are typically the number one corruption risk because large amounts of, usually the majority of government funding runs through procurement systems. And if those systems are not transparent, if they're leaking, as they often are, focusing on how we can improve the procurement system. Just one example of how you can build a system to help governance work better to lower levels of corruption.
So, Tim, you touched on very important points and the central role of government in all of this. There's just no way we can walk around or navigate this space, funding cuts, whatever it is, scaling, as long as it's tied to development. We can't walk outside of government. And when the funding cuts happened, when the first set of executive orders came out, we immediately at APF called for a meeting of our members to understand how this was impacting them, how it was impacting even those they are funding. And of course, we had some resolutions, or there were key points we took away. The major one, the first key point was working closely with government to ensure that government is actually doing what they're set up to do, and then philanthropy can support their work, because philanthropy cannot fill that gap. So ensuring the efficiency of government is key, and that's why your work is really central in this space. So moving away from government for a bit, what do you see the role of APF members at this time? And by APF members, I mean the foundations and philanthropists within our network, and maybe those that are not even in our network. Do you think there are big bets that philanthropy should be making at this point, or bets that we shouldn't be making at all?
Yeah, I think if there are big bets to be made, it is identifying those civil society organizations that have been effective at influencing government and building the capacity and capabilities of government. And I think we as philanthropists often don't look for those. That is, we're often, maybe because we want direct attribution or something, the direct service delivery, the delivering of specific services right directly to the people of the NGOs. It's easier for us to see and to count attribution. But as I said, I don't think we get to population scale impact that way. So I think if philanthropists are looking for the most effective organizations that do direct service delivery, I think we need to start changing the way that we even identify who our program partners are, and find those that are doing the best at building government capacity and capabilities. And I would make big bets there. And I also think we need to, as philanthropists, concomitant with that, is stop thinking about attribution and rather think about contribution. Because this more systems change approach cannot be done by just one actor alone. Absolutely. It requires a coalition, and that means you're contributing to improving a system which eventually is going to provide better public service delivery. Mm-hmm. So move from thinking about attribution to moving to contribution, and then also change our mindsets from short-term to long-term. Changing these public systems is not something that's done overnight. It requires time, it requires work. I often think it's in 10-year time frames, but it's at least 5-year time frames. So we as funders will do best if we are providing longer term grants to the organizations that are doing good work in helping to improve the performance of government, and are doing it in a more flexible way. So this is another thing that we often do from the philanthropic side, is we're quite rigid about our conditions and our disbursements. And if you start thinking about centering government systems, you have to be iterative in your approach. Things change, things adjust. And so doing it in a way that allows you to work with your program partners that's a bit more flexible is also important. So flexible, long-term contribution, not attribution, I think are ways we
Absolutely.
need to work.
Moving from attribution to contribution, and let's focus on long-term flexible funding. Thank you so much, Tim, but I will not let you go without bringing up something interesting about you. I know that you recently moved to India, all the way from Seattle, and you're doing great work in that space and also on the African continent. Can you speak a bit to what informed that move and how you see yourself in this space in the next few years?
Yeah. So the simplest way to answer that question is I moved because I'm a trailing spouse. So I'm following my wife and she's working in India. But we've lived in India before. So we've lived in India for maybe 10 of the last 25 years. I it's it's closer to the action. I mean, I come from the Pacific Northwest of the United States, but my heart has always been drawn to Asia and Africa. So while I'm not on the African continent, I'm at least much closer. And we also do some work in Asia as well. But I think this is where the real dynamism in the world is. I mean, we talk about the Asian century. I think we're coming to the African century. This is where the most exciting, innovative things are happening, and so I feel like I'm closer to it.
Awesome. There you have it. Tim likes being close to the action. You can tell this is why we keep bringing him back. Thank you so much, Tim, for coming back again. And possibly we'll set a date for another 2 to 3 years to bring you back.
Love to do it. It's an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tim.